Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. During the next 30 to 40 minutes, I will discuss for you the main challenges of the European OTT landscape today. If you have any question, I'll answer them at the end of this presentation. But first, a word about us. DataXis is a global business intelligence company with offices in Europe, Americas, and Africa. Regarding our research activity, DataXis is a leader in market intelligence on TV, media, OTT, and telecoms, with a strong emphasis on Europe, LATAM, and emerging markets, including Africa and Middle East. We also organize events, Next TV CEO, Next TV Series, and Sport TV conferences, which are hosted this year in Miami, Mexico, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Bogota, Berlin, Dubai, and Kigali, where our next conference will take place. It is Next TV CEO Africa. The DEXIS also has a newsletter, Next TV News, for Latin America, Brazil, and Africa. I encourage you to subscribe if you wish. It is free. Our main topic today will be OTT, over-the-top content distribution. Unlike IPTV, which is distribution on a closed network controlled by the operator, OTT is network agnostic, and OTT users only need a usual internet connection to access content. This also means that a content provider won't need its own network to build such a service. We'll focus especially on SVOD, subscription video on demand, which is widely known as That's How Netflix Works. We'll set aside linear content distribution for this presentation. So when mentioning OTT services, I will mean SVOD platforms, those granting access to a catalog of non-linear content, usually made of fiction programs. After a few words about our region of interest, Europe, we will analyze the market structure with an overview of competition and then dive into the wonderful world of connected devices and their implications on OTT distribution. Then I will discuss the role of operators and third parties in SVOD distribution strategies. For all of you who are not based in Europe, but also for those who are, it's always useful to re-examine the basics about the region to begin a webinar. Today, our region will include the CIS countries, referring to the ex-USSR countries, but not Turkey. First of all, you can see that we have very different countries in terms of population, from almost 150 million Russians to more or less 80 million in Germany, to only 2 million inhabitants in Slovenia, which is not even on the graph, by the way. Please note that Russia is the biggest country, but not the most advanced. For example, you can see that their GDP per capita is not very high. The richest countries are unsurprisingly in Scandinavia, as well as German-speaking countries, with lower GDPs per capita in the Balkans and in the former USSR. It's interesting to take this data into account, since SVOD ARPUs don't change that much from one country to another, and this will logically impact the performance of any given service, because a 10 euro service doesn't have the same value in Norway and in Belarus, for example. But it's not an actual rule, as SVOD penetration is higher in France than in Austria, for example. OTT services obviously need the internet to strive, and here we'll learn a little more about connectivity in Europe. Internet penetration is very high, reaching over 90% in most countries, which means that basically everyone has internet except elderly and extremely remote areas. Next generation accesses, or NGA, are also growing at a fast pace. NGA include all FTTX connections which use optical fiber to enable higher speeds than fully copper-based connections. In theory, at least 30 megabytes per second. Today, even 30 mega are not that fast, especially when delivering video content. And here we're talking about fixed internet, because even if OTT services can often be used on smartphones, most of their usage in Europe takes place at home. At the end of the internet connections are the connected devices. You can see a number of more than 3.8 devices per household in 2019. It is quite low because it's an average for the whole region. For example, in France, we have more than 5.5 devices per household in total. This number keeps increasing even as the average household size is decreasing in Europe, which means we have a big increase in penetration over the population. These devices are also quite diverse, and all ownership numbers are growing. For SVOD services, this means that to reach the largest number of potential consumers, the platform must be compatible with as many screens as possible, which in turn mean development and update costs, especially to adapt to the new models and operating systems that are coming out every year. Of course, smart TV numbers are lower than the others, but this is hiding the strength of this device within the household. The number is lower because TV is used by several people at the same time, by opposition to tablets and smartphones, for example. We'll get back to this in a moment and analyze the role taken by TV sets in OTT consumption. So, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, these actors have two things in common. First, they are market leaders in their segment. Two, they are American. Their profiles are a bit different, though Disney is a major studio and has been producing content for decades. Amazon is a high-tech giant, and Netflix is one of the few digital video pure players. On the European side, we also have a few pure players, like Mubi or Eevee, which are not really significant. Mubi is a niche platform focused on auteur cinema. Eevee is limited to the very specific Russian market. The only thing putting them together is their small size when compared to their American counterparts. Other European platforms have been created by telecom operators. We counted Sky in this category, even if the company was acquired by Comcast, because it's still inherently European. We also have Telia, which acquired Bonnier Broadcasting Group, and its OTT C More, which is quite relevant in the Nordics, but limited to this region. Liberty Global and Telenet also have SVOD offers for their clients as a means to enrich their own offer. But the most active segment is formed by the OTT platforms created by broadcasters. National broadcasters have financial strength, skills, content, and of course a well-recognizable brand. This is a specificity of the European market. There is practically no pan-European broadcasting group, but around 3 main actors on each market, usually 1 public broadcasters and 2 private ones. All of them are threatened by a stagnating or decreasing advertising market, and they need to adapt their business model, which means adapt their offer, which means switch to non-linear programming. In order to succeed, some started their own platforms, like TV2 in Norway with TV2 Sumo, while others formed alliances like Discovery with ProSieben Sat.1 in Germany for the Join platform, or France Television plus M6 and TF1, who will soon launch Salto in France. While you could think TV2 is only a lone broadcaster and would have a hard time launching their own service, they actually have a very powerful group behind them, namely the Egmont Group, which is active in publishing as well as audiovisual content production, which is very convenient, obviously. Looking now at the performance of these actors, the top 3 is not at all surprising, since we find Netflix and Amazon followed by HBO. Even if the latter is not present across the whole region, HBO content, however, is available everywhere. At Orange in France or at Sky, where Sky is present. I would also like to stress that Amazon includes Prime Video in their Prime subscription in their biggest markets, which explains the very good numbers in countries where their e-commerce platform is successful. If we get out of the top 4, we also cross the 2 million subscriber bar, and we get to the actors who have a strong national position, but who are not really big at a continental level. For example, Telecom Italia is here because their Team Vision service replaces IPTV in their offer. while the French group Altis gives access to their SFR Play service to all of their IPTV subscribers. So apart from Nantes, all these actors outside the top four have a strictly national presence. Geographically speaking, Germany's top spot is not a surprise, seeing their demographic weight. What's interesting here is rather the relative weight of Scandinavia. Let's remember that Norway has only 5 million inhabitants. That's way less than Switzerland or Belgium. Russia, on the opposite, has a smaller subscriber count. They also have lower ARPU than the rest of Europe. They wouldn't even be the top 10 if you were speaking of revenues. One of the most discussed topics related to OTT is the alleged competition that would exist between SVOD and pay TV. But here, in Europe, this opposition is not translated into facts. We see that the pay TV market didn't really suffer from the development of SVOD. We even notice a slight growth, but far away from the growth in SVOD. However, please keep in mind that we track SVOD accounts here and that one person can have several of them. In certain zones, we actually have more than one account per household on average, which is obviously not the case for pay TV. One reason for the good health of pay TV is that ARPUs are not as high in Europe as in the US, for example. Pay TV on the old continent often means access to a large lineup of basic channels. So we don't have yet a big cord-cutting trend like overseas. We do see, however, the emergence of cord-nevers, people who simply never subscribed to pay TV, but this has been limited so far. For all these reasons, SVOD doesn't represent a deadly threat to operators like in America. Both offers are not necessarily competing. SVOD has been so far more of an opportunity to develop the market, and it showed that pay TV still had growth potential. Let's keep, however, in mind that this is the big picture, and it hides regional disparities, which we can see here. The most obvious thing on these graphs is the gap between East and West. In Central and Eastern Europe, the advertising market is smaller, the SVOD penetration is lower, putting less pressure on broadcasters and operators alike to launch or integrate new services, while lack of localization prevents global players from having a real importance. The notable exception is Poland, with the biggest and the most dynamic market in Eastern Europe. Other areas, like Russia, have very strong local components that create entry barriers for potential newcomers. For example, a market preference for local contents, a very strict legislation on companies' foreign ownership. Russia, by the way, accounts for most of the difference between CEE and CIS. This gives you an idea of the weight of the country, but also of the lower ARPUs which we talked about if you compare the graphs. Also noteworthy is once again the importance of the Nordics. This zone is the most advanced in Europe, where all free-to-air broadcasters have already diversified their offers with AVOD or SVOD services, and often successfully. So the actual battlefield for all the major players is Western Europe and the Nordics, with little effort put into reaching the other countries. Now that we portrayed the market, we will now proceed to its main issues, the strategy that OTT services must implement to reach the end customer. How can OTTs reach this market that we just described? The consensus today is that an OTT service must be multi-screen, but around 60 to 70% of all video consumption takes place on a TV screen. Although to enable this consumption, the TV must be connected. So to reach the TV screen, we have three options. Two of them are here, namely smart TVs and dedicated streaming devices. We're talking here about the installed base, the devices that people have at home, not the shipments. The European smart TV market gathers the main global actors. But the Chinese manufacturers are less present than in the rest of the world, while other brands are overrepresented, like Philips, for example. The market is dominated by two Korean brands, Samsung and LG. TV sets sold in Europe today are overwhelmingly smart TVs, with last year an average penetration on household of 42%, which varies within the continent, of course, but still it is important. But OTT can also be accessed through the streaming devices like Chromecast or Roku. Roku is only present in the UK, note. But we can add both penetration, obviously, since one can have a smart TV and a streaming stick. But these numbers are growing, which is good news for the SVOD services. Are the news good enough, though? Not really, since platform fragmentation remains extremely challenging for the OTT services. Most TV manufacturers use their own proprietary solution. For example, Samsung has Tizen. Android is only used by a rather small share of the market, but counting nonetheless Philips. That means that even if your app works on Android, you have to develop it further to adapt to the other devices, and this is not simple. I didn't even mention the different models, different versions, which do not all support the same apps. So the reachable base is a theoretical one, not a real one. Except, of course, if you have the financial resources to make your service available to all the TVs. Like if you're Netflix, for example, your weight enables you to deal with Samsung and have a dedicated button on the remote control. But small platforms, they can only dream of this. And European platforms are the small ones. So the third solution after smart TV and streaming devices is the set-top box. There are many of them, 190 million pay TV subscribers at end 2019, which means as many set-top boxes in circulation. However, most of them are broadcast only and cannot integrate OTT, or they are not even connected to the internet. At the Taxis, we continually track pay TV operators' technological choices in terms of advanced set-top boxes. By advanced, I mean 4K, voice control, and especially, you guessed it, efficient OTT services integration. So here is an excerpt from our data. As I said, a lot of operators still have dumb set-top boxes, so to speak, which can't provide access to OTTs. Which means their customers need to access content via the other solutions I mentioned. Especially since these solutions sometimes offer way better user interfaces than what the box can do. The operator's response to this is to migrate their client base toward better interactive boxes. We can also see it as a proactive strategy in the case of bundling or aggregating, if you prefer, of services. But the idea is the same. It's to avoid losing customers. The pressure is not the same everywhere. We talked about it in CE a few slides ago. But time is running out anyway, since the usual lifespan of a set-top box is 6 years, and this doesn't necessarily allow paid TV operators to adapt rapidly to the evolutions of the market. A market which is very fragmented with very different ARPUs and sizes. But the most common trend we see is an increase in Android TV deployments. Although Android can mean different solutions, either an operator tier solution or an open source kernel that can be heavily customized by operators. This solution is favored mostly by smaller operators, therefore it doesn't translate into a large share of the installed base. RDK, on the other hand, is actually implemented by only a handful of actors, whereas in the US it's number one ahead of Android. Here it's mostly used by NOS in Portugal and Liberty Global, even if they are selling most of their activities. Concerning Apple, their boxes are often used in special premium offers, with the notable exception of Salt in Switzerland, which uses Apple TV boxes for all IPTV subscribers. However, most of the large operators choose proprietary solutions. For example, SFR or Telefonica, because They can afford the technical developments and therefore preserve an entire independence and flexibility for their boxes. These actors don't appear on the graph, but they still account for most of the subscribers. Among them is also Telenor in Norway, which is now able to provide an offer that mixes seamlessly SVOD services and linear channel. This TOE offer is a prime example of what can be done to integrate OTTs. Once again, this can only happen where the SVOD penetration is the highest because it pushes operators to change their offers and their boxes. The situation is very different in other countries. For example, in Austria, only Sky is getting close to this type of offering. You can see, even if it's written quite small, that Telenor implemented a points system that allows the customer to choose very flexibly what they subscribe to. Flexibility is a long-standing issue in pay television, with operators shying away from a la carte systems while trying to introduce more granularity in their offers. But this flexibility is now being offered on the internet with non-binding offers and delinearization, and that also pushes for the appearance of offers such as Telenor's. The pay TV operators' aggregation strategies are an opportunity for OTT platforms and a good solution for new or smaller services to get distributed to a large audience from the start. Practically all OTTs take part in this game, which legitimates the aggregating position progressively taken by pay TV operators. However, it is not exclusive to them, as other actors can also have a strong brand, a customer relationship, and, above all, content, and the means to aggregate more content. We chose Amazon as an example. The platform aggregates third-party content on Amazon channels and uses it as a means to expand both its catalog, its geographical coverage, and to complete its existing retail services offering. I have to mention that aggregation comes with challenges such as customer retention on bundles, which is very hard because nothing prevents a telecom customers with a Disney bundle to unsubscribe and order Disney as standalone. You can try to lower the prices, but the margins are already super low. And if the OTT services disappear from the offers, customers will follow them. So in the end, the operator's most important assets are their networks, and therefore their capacity to aggregate content and services, for example, mobile telephony, that kind of things, and to do relevant packages out of them. It's definitely a strong position, but it might not stay dominant for long because they are not alone. On the other side, from an OTT service point of view, the situation is not much simpler. There are three major challenges to face. The first one is the technical challenge. As we said, there are many different devices, all have different screens and operating systems and controllers. Supporting your platform to as many devices as possible requires investments and consideration, but it's key to procure a valuable experience to your customers. In addition, your user interface must be excellent to stand comparison with the others out there. Netflix UX, for example, is a model in this field and was copied thousands of times. Customer access is another challenge. Reaching a customer without a strong brand like Disney or HBO is tough in the crowded media landscape. So even for niche services, reaching critical mass is difficult. You also need to build the customers, which not all companies can. This is where a partnership with a pay TV operator can come in handy. And thirdly, well, the most obvious obstacle to entry in the OTT field is the content, because neither buying it nor producing it is cheap and the prices keep increasing. So to conclude this webinar and sum up what we saw, the European OTT landscape presents very different actors, but it's clearly dominated by Netflix, Amazon, HBO, and soon Disney. These actors all have the right technology, the right brand, and the right content, and they multiply their distribution channels by striking deals with the operators. Other actors don't have the same size nor the same resources, but they still face the same issues on tech, customer access, and content. Only big broadcasters can reach a strong position on content, and it's usually limited to national content. They also have strong brands, unlike pure players. These ones must find a niche, for example, indie cinema. Most of them lack resources to take on this tech issue efficiently, and they suffer from the domination of Netflix. So, in a broader perspective, the pure players exist and their numbers are growing, but the most relevant trend lies in broadcasters and operators who launch their own OTT to enrich their offer, like Sky, Deutsche Telekom in some country, Telenet in Belgium. Netflix, Amazon, Disney all have the means to address the challenges described in this presentation. Smaller platforms, on the other hand, struggle. Therefore, we see relatively few new entrants, apart from the broadcasters who already have a brand and content. Operators have the tech, the brand, but they don't necessarily have content. Think about the OCS service from Orange in France, which value lies mostly in the HBO catalog. Although they have the resources to acquire what they need, but this remains far from their core business, which is telecommunication. Thank you for listening to this webinar. I would like to highlight again that everything we talked about will be discussed by the actors themselves at our conferences. The next European one is Sport TV Series Europe. It will take place in Berlin in June. And all the data you saw in this presentation comes from our own research. I will now answer some of your questions if you have some. If I can't answer them all, I will answer you later per email. And I hope to see you soon at one of our events. Thank you very much.